Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me?
Oh my God.
You're okay. Just stay with me, all right? Take a breath.
I didn't see it. I didn't see the rail.
That's all right. Look at me. Are you hurt anywhere?
No, I think I'm
Okay,
fine.
stay right here with me.
The morning sun hangs low over the highway, casting long shadows across the asphalt as the first police car pulls up to mile marker 112. Through the grain of the body cam footage, the scene looks like a war zone. A yellow school bus sits hunched against the shoulder, its side looking as though a giant had peeled it open like a tin can. Smoke drifts from the engine, mixing with the cold Michigan air, while the blue and red lights of the patrol cars bounce off the shattered glass littering the road. As the troopers step out of their vehicles, they are met with a wall of sound, the hiss of air brakes, the distant roar of passing traffic, and the high-pitched, frantic cries of teenagers. A few students are already outside, standing in small clusters, their faces pale and their clothes dusty from the impact. They look small against the backdrop of the massive, mangled vehicle. One trooper jogs toward the center of the chaos, his heavy boots crunching on debris. He passes a woman in a white long-sleeve shirt who is standing with her hand pressed firmly over her mouth. She is shaking, her eyes wide as she watches the officers rush past her toward the middle of the bus. She doesn't say a word, but her face tells a story of pure shock. The officer doesn't stop to talk to her yet, his focus is on the bus. A jagged, twisted piece of the heavy metal guardrail has sliced through the outer shell of the bus and traveled deep into the seating area. It is a terrifying sight, showing just how much force was behind the crash. "Is anyone dead?" the trooper calls out, his voice urgent and sharp. A voice from inside the wreckage answers back, breathless and tight with fear. They report that everyone is alive, but the situation is far from okay. Someone is still trapped deep inside the twisted metal. As the trooper reaches the door, the reality of the morning settles in. A routine field trip has just turned into a life-or-death rescue mission. Inside the bus, the air is thick with dust and the smell of torn metal. The trooper climbs through the entrance, his flashlight cutting through the dim interior to find a scene of absolute terror. Near the middle of the vehicle, a young girl named Daisy Miller is trapped. She isn't screaming anymore, she is pinned in a way that looks impossible, her left foot caught deep underneath a heavy, jagged piece of the guardrail that is sliced through the floor. "We got one that's still partially pinned," the trooper calls out over his radio, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Feet are pinned in underneath from the guardrail right now." Daisy's face is pale, her eyes searching the officers for some sign that she will be okay. Nearby, her friend Chloe Chen watches with wide, tear-filled eyes, her hands shaking as she tries to stay close to her friend without getting in the way of the rescue. Outside, the first responders begin to unload heavy hydraulic tools, the jaws of life, to deal with the steel that has become a trap. The metal is thick and reinforced, and every time the bus shifts even an inch, a new wave of pain crosses Daisy's face. The officers work quickly, checking her pulse and talking to her to keep her conscious. "Stay with us, Daisy," one says softly, trying to drown out the screech of metal being pried apart. While the rescue team fights to free her, the first assessment is grim. The guardrail didn't just hit the bus, it pierced through the cabin like a spear, traveling several feet inside before coming to a stop. It is a miracle that more students weren't hit directly by the initial strike. As the paramedics prepare a stretcher and more sirens wail in the distance, the focus remains entirely on the girl in the middle of the wreckage, whose life is now measured in the minutes it takes to cut through the steel. Outside the bus, the trooper finds the woman in the white shirt again. She is pacing back and forth near the back of the vehicle, her face pale and her hands still trembling. This is 44-year-old Martha Gable, the driver responsible for the 9 students and 4 adults on board. The officer speaks to her calmly, trying to find out what caused the bus to leave the road so suddenly. Martha looks at the officer with wide, watery eyes. "I don't know if I hit something and veered over like that," she says, her voice shaking. She explains that the trip started at 5:30 that morning and they hadn't been on the road very long at all. She seems confused, searching for a reason for the disaster. She mentions that she felt the bus pulling, but it felt like it was pulling to the left, even though the bus crashed into the guardrail on the right side. The trooper watches her closely, listening to her explain that she couldn't tell if it was the wind or a problem with the wheel. When the officer asks her directly if she fell asleep or dozed off, Martha shakes her head quickly. "I don't think so," she replies, insisting that she doesn't think she lost consciousness. She stands there, surrounded by the sound of sirens and the sight of her mangled bus, clinging to the idea that a mechanical failure or a gust of wind was to blame for the tragedy. As the rescue team continues their heavy work, the trooper turns his attention to the other students huddled nearby. He learns that this wasn't just any school trip. These teenagers are part of a theater program from Grand Rapids. They had been on their way to Oberlin College in Ohio for a special tour of the campus and its famous arts program. For Daisy Miller, Chloe Chan, and their classmates, this was supposed to be a day of big dreams and excitement. They had been talking about their future acting roles and stage designs when the bus suddenly left the pavement. The theater dream they had shared just moments before was replaced by the cold reality of a highway shoulder and the smell of burning rubber. The trooper chats with the kids, trying to keep them calm as they wait for their parents to arrive from hours away. Some have minor scrapes or bloody noses, but the emotional shock is much deeper. They stand in a circle, looking back at the bus that was supposed to take them to their future, now sitting broken against a metal rail. The excitement of the college tour has vanished, replaced by a quiet, heavy fear for their friends still trapped inside. While the theater is usually a place of make-believe, there is nothing imaginary about the twisted steel and the flashing lights surrounding them now. While the rescue crews work with heavy tools, a state trooper pulls aside one of the adult mentors who had been sitting near the front of the bus. The mentor looks shaken, their eyes darting back toward Martha Gable, who is still pacing by the patrol cars. The trooper asks if they noticed anything unusual before the crash happened. The mentor lowers their voice, glancing around to make sure the students are out of earshot. They admit that something had been bothering them for several miles. "I noticed that our driver had dozed off at first," the mentor whispers to the officer. They describe seeing Martha's head dip and her eyes struggle to stay open long before the bus ever hit the rumble strips. This small whisper of information changes the tone of the investigation instantly. It isn't just a mechanical failure or a gust of wind anymore, there is now a witness who saw the driver losing the battle with sleep. The trooper takes careful notes, realizing that the driver's story about a pulling wheel might not be the whole truth. As the mentor finishes their statement, the sound of metal snapping echoes across the highway. The rescue is getting closer to the end, but the mystery of why the crash happened is just beginning to unfold. The trooper looks back at Martha, who is still acting like the victim of a bad accident, unaware that her secret has already been shared. The trooper walks back to the patrol car where Martha Gable is waiting. She looks up at him, her face full of worry as she grips her phone tightly. "I'm going to beat myself up over this," she says, her voice cracking. She explains that she has 2 kids of her own and that she can't stop thinking about the families of the students on the bus. Martha leans against the cool metal of the police car, her breath coming in short, shaky gasps. "I just told the kids back by the ambulance," she whispers, "I'm expecting one of your moms to show up and beat me up any minute now." She tells the officer that she knows exactly how she would react if it were her own children in that mangled bus, and the thought seems to terrify her more than the crash itself. The officer nods, trying to keep her calm, but he watches her eyes carefully. While she sounds like a concerned parent, there is a deep sense of panic in her voice that feels like more than just regular worry. She keeps talking about what the parents will think, almost as if she is already bracing for them to blame her. Even as she expresses her fear, Martha still hasn't mentioned the dozing off that the mentor reported. She continues to play the part of the shocked driver who experienced a terrible, unexplainable accident. But as she talks about the mom instinct and her fear of the parents, the trooper begins to wonder if her guilt is coming from a place of knowing she did something wrong. While Martha Gable sits in the back of the patrol car, the trooper asks for permission to check her belongings. "Go for it," she replies, leaning her head back against the seat. The officer reaches for her purse and begins a quick search, looking for anything that might explain why a professional driver would lose consciousness behind the wheel. As he looks through the bag, the trooper's flashlight lands on a small prescription bottle. He pulls it out and reads the label aloud, lorazepam. This is a powerful medication often used to treat anxiety, but it is well known for causing extreme drowsiness and slow reaction times. The officer looks through the window at Martha and asks when she last took the medicine. "About 8 o'clock last night," Martha answers without hesitation. She watches the officer handle the bottle, her expression remaining calm, almost as if she doesn't realize how serious this discovery is. She adds that she doesn't usually take them when she's away from home, but the presence of the pills adds a new, dark layer to the investigation. The trooper places the medication into an evidence bag, his mind racing. Between the witness who saw her dozing off and the discovery of a sedative in her purse, the mechanical failure story is falling apart. Martha remains in the back of the car, promising to behave herself and not touch the police computer, still acting as though she is just a helpful witness to a random accident. But for the investigators, the search of the purse has provided the first physical clue that something was very wrong inside that bus long before it hit the guardrail. The loud, grinding sound of metal finally stops as the rescue crew manages to pry the jagged guardrail away from the bus floor. With the heavy steel removed, the paramedics carefully move Daisy Miller onto a stretcher. She is pale and exhausted, her body shaking from the pain and the cold air blowing into the bus. The workers act quickly, wrapping her leg in thick bandages and loading her into a waiting ambulance with the sirens already wailing. "She's going down to Sparrow Lansing," an officer says over his radio, watching as the ambulance doors slam shut. Daisy is rushed away under emergency lights, facing a long and scary journey to the hospital for a severe injury to her left foot and ankle. The relief that she is finally out of the bus is mixed with a heavy sense of worry because everyone can see how bad the injury really is. Outside, Martha Gable stands by the police car, watching the ambulance pull away. She looks small and lost against the bright emergency lights. Even though the jaws of life have finished their job, the air still feels heavy with tension. Most of the other students have been moved to a safer spot, but the sight of their friend being driven away in an ambulance leaves them quiet and stunned. The troopers begin to clear the debris, but the focus of the investigation is now shifting. While Daisy is on her way to get help, the officers turn their full attention back to the driver. The rescue is over, but the search for the truth about why this happened is just getting started. Martha sits silently in the patrol car, her eyes following the distant red lights of the ambulance until they disappear around a curve in the highway. As the ambulance carrying Daisy disappears into the distance, the trooper returns to the patrol car where Martha Gable is waiting. He needs to coordinate with other officers over the phone, and Martha sits silently in the back seat, listening to every word. While the trooper speaks, he shares an update about the situation at the crash site and the condition of the student who was pinned. Although the specific details about the injury are kept private on the police radio, the gravity of the news is impossible to hide. Martha's reaction is immediate. Her face pales even further, and she brings her hand back to her mouth in a gesture of pure horror. As she listens to the trooper describe how the guardrail sheared through the bus and what it did to the young girl's foot, she lets out a shaky breath. "Oh, I hope that little girl can keep her foot forever," she whispers, her voice cracking with a mix of fear and desperation. The trooper looks at her through the rearview mirror and simply replies, "Yeah, me too." The atmosphere inside the car becomes incredibly heavy. Martha leans her head against the window, watching the flashing lights reflect off the glass. She knows that Emma, the girl she now calls Daisy, is in surgery, and that mechanical failure story she told earlier feels smaller and less convincing with every passing second. The reality of the redacted truth hangs between them. Martha is no longer just a driver who had a bad day, she is a woman who just heard that her actions might cost a teenager a limb. As the patrol car begins to move toward the hospital for her own blood draw, Martha remains slumped in the seat, her quiet prayers for Daisy's foot sounding like a plea for her own forgiveness. The patrol car pulls away from the crash site, leaving the flashing lights and twisted metal behind. Inside the quiet cabin, the trooper begins to ask Martha more questions about her morning. He wants to know exactly how she felt before the bus left the road. Martha stares out the window at the passing trees, her voice low as she answers. "Did you feel tired driving in?" the officer asks. "Did you have some coffee this morning?" Martha sighs and shakes her head slowly. "I didn't have any coffee this morning," she admits. She looks down at her hands and adds, "I was a little tired." "You are. But I've never fell asleep in a car, period." It is a small admission, but it carries a lot of weight. The trooper pushes a little further, asking again if she might have dozed off without realizing it. Martha still struggles to accept the idea. She explains that she usually gets carsick if she isn't the one driving, so she can't imagine being able to sleep in a moving vehicle. "I don't know for sure," she says, her voice trailing off. She goes back to her earlier theories, wondering if a sudden gust of wind or hitting a bump knocked her to the side. Even though she admits to being a little tired and skipping her morning coffee, Martha remains stuck in a state of confusion. She describes the moment the accident started, saying it all happened so fast. "I heard the rumble strips and then I just heard kids screaming," she repeats. In her mind, she is still searching for a reason that doesn't involve her closing her eyes, even as the evidence starts to point in a much different direction. As the trooper drives Martha Gable to the hospital for her blood test, the conversation turns toward more personal habits. The officer asks again about any substances she might have used recently, noting that she seemed calm but a little slow in her speech. Martha looks out the window, her reflection showing a tired, worried face. "Do you do any marijuana?" the officer asks. Martha doesn't try to hide it. "I ate a couple gummies probably a week ago," she says. She tells the officer that if there is anything in her system besides her medication, that would be it. She seems to believe that because it was a week ago, it shouldn't be a big deal. The trooper listens but knows that blood tests can be very specific. He also remembers the small bottle of lorazepam he found in her purse earlier. Even though Martha claims she is normally too tired to drink and prefers not to be stupid from alcohol, the combination of a week-old gummy and prescription pills starts to paint a different picture for the investigators. Martha continues to talk, almost as if she is trying to convince herself that she is a safe driver. She even makes a small joke about how she ends up on TV getting arrested in stories like this. But the joke feels heavy and out of place. While she thinks the gummy admission is a small detail from the past, the police are starting to think it might be a key part of why the theater trip ended in such a terrible way. Back at the crash site, the troopers are finally able to pull the digital data from the bus's computer. The numbers on the screen tell a story of a vehicle that never even tried to stop. According to the records, the bus was traveling at exactly 68 miles per hour on cruise control the entire time leading up to the impact. There was no sign of braking until just 2 seconds before the bus slammed into the heavy metal guardrail. The officers look at the data in silence, realizing how close this came to being an even bigger disaster. The road had a curve right where the bus went off, and if the driver hadn't jerked the wheel back at the very last second, the bus wouldn't have just hit the rail, it would have teeted up and driven straight off the road. If that had happened, the bus would have plunged down a steep hill, likely killing everyone on board. Martha had told the officers earlier that she heard the rumble strips before the screaming started. However, the data suggests she would have already passed the strips by the time she reacted. The only reason the bus didn't fly off the cliff was that glancing blow with the guardrail. While the guardrail technically saved the bus from falling, the collision was incredibly violent because the bus was moving so fast. The troopers discuss how the front strike plate of the rail was actually ripped off and taken with the bus, which is likely what caused the most damage. It was a terrifying combination of high speed and a lack of braking that turned a simple driving error into a life-changing wreck. The investigators stand by the road, looking at the steep embankment just past the shoulder. They realize that while the guardrail caused a terrible injury, it actually prevented a much bigger tragedy. The road curves at mile marker 112, and the bus was headed straight for a deep drop-off. If the metal rail hadn't been there to catch the vehicle, the bus likely would have flipped or plunged down the hill, which the troopers believe could have killed everyone on board. However, the way the bus hit the rail created a different kind of horror. The very front of the guardrail, known as the strike plate, was the first thing the bus struck. Instead of the bus bouncing off, the heavy metal rail pierced right through the front of the cabin. It acted like a giant knife, slicing down the passenger side of the bus as the vehicle continued to move forward at high speed. The officers examined the glancing blow and notice how the metal rode the line of the bus. It was this initial impact with the strike plate that trapped Daisy's foot against the floor. One trooper points out that the rail just sliced her as it moved through the seating area. It was a high-cost trade-off. The guardrail saved the bus from a fatal plunge, but the price of that safety was the devastating injury that now left a young girl fighting for her future. As the troopers continue to look through the bus, they realize that Daisy was not the only one who was badly hurt. Another young girl named Chloe Chen was also rushed to the hospital with a very serious injury. While Daisy's injury was to her foot, Chloe's injury was to her head. During the crash, the force of the impact was so strong that one of the passengers flew forward and hit their head on the top of the windshield. The officers find a perfect head strike on the glass above the driver's side. They describe it as a spot where someone's head hit the glass so hard it left a clear mark. This was likely Chloe, who was diagnosed with a concussion and a traumatic brain injury. The situation was even more dangerous for Chloe because her mother told police that she had already gone through brain surgery before this crash. The impact of the bus hitting the guardrail at 68 miles per hour caused her old injury to get much worse. Because of the head strike, doctors had to put Chloe under 24-hour supervision to make sure her brain didn't swell or bleed. The troopers talk about how scary the spinal compression could be from a hit like that. Even though she didn't get pinned by the metal like Daisy, Chloe's life was changed in an instant by the violence of the crash. The investigation moves from the roadside to a computer screen where Michigan State Police finally obtained the bus's internal security footage. The video provides a clear, silent witness to the moments before the tragedy. It begins at 6:53 a.m. with the road ahead looking perfectly clear and no other cars in sight. As the troopers watch the tape, they notice something that completely changes the case. For several seconds before the bus ever reaches the rumble strips, Martha Gable's eyes appear to be closed. There is no pulling wheel or sudden wind, there is only a driver who has lost the battle with sleep while moving at nearly 70 miles per hour. Just before the impact, Martha's eyes suddenly snap open, and she jerks the wheel hard to the left in a panic. But it is too late. The camera captures the sudden, violent force as the bus strikes the guardrail. The impact is so strong that the person sitting directly behind the driver is thrown forward through the air. The bus continues to scrape along the metal rail before finally coming to a stop. On the audio, the quiet morning is shattered by the sounds of the students. "Oh my God. Emma, are you okay?" "No. Emma, someone help Emma," a voice cries out. The tape never lies, and for the investigators, this footage proves that the accident was actually a moment of total negligence that would have a permanent cost. The investigation finally moves into the clinical setting of a laboratory, where forensic scientists test the blood samples taken from Martha Gable. While Martha had insisted she hadn't been drinking, the lab results tell a more complicated story about what was in her system during the drive. According to the forensic reports, alcohol was not detected, but the tests found detectable amounts of both THC and lorazepam. Investigators realized that this combination of a sedative and a psychoactive substance likely made her a little tired, admission a major understatement. For days after the crash, on April 2nd, the story took its most tragic turn. Despite the best efforts of the doctors at Sparrow Lansing Hospital, the damage to Daisy Miller's left foot was too severe to repair. The hope that she could keep it forever was lost when doctors were forced to perform an amputation. Daisy, the young theater student with dreams of the stage, now faced a long road of physical therapy and recovery. At the same time, her friend Chloe continued to struggle with the effects of her traumatic brain injury, with both families starting GoFundMe campaigns to help pay for the massive medical bills. The legal consequences for Martha Gable followed quickly. According to court documents, she was charged with 3 counts of operating while intoxicated causing serious injury. She was also charged with 3 counts of operating while intoxicated with passengers under the age of 16. Instead of going through a full trial, Martha entered a plea of no contest as part of a deal with the prosecutors. In the end, a simple school field trip meant to celebrate the arts ended in a courtroom and a hospital wing. The case serves as a chilling reminder of the responsibility that comes with being behind the wheel. While the theater program continues, the lives of Daisy and Chloe are forever marked by those few seconds when a driver's eyes drifted shut at 68 miles per hour.